Hey there, internets. So, on to election post-mortem. Probably going to be just a second part here. And I'm going to try and get a couple others together so at least, tomorrow and over the weekend, some other things can happen. So, let's talk about the other aspects. I really concentrated on whether Trump was a net positive or net negative because 2024, if he's the candidate, that's huge. The other areas, though, we have strategy, we got leadership, what effect did abortion have, and lastly, candidate quality. And we're going to kind of go in those orders. Strategy and leadership, those are really tied tightly together, with abortion working into strategy. So we're going to kind of work through these and finish up with candidate quality, which arguably could be strategy, could be leadership, but let's just think about this. The first thing is, what did we stand for? Senator Rick Scott, tried to show some leadership. And if he had successfully argued it, gotten it out there, and gotten a message out there of what we stood for, other than not Biden or inflation is bad, then I might have said, hey, let's have this guy for a majority leader. The fact that we are keeping Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, and this gal that's running the RNC, currently running the RNC, is a travesty. We should not be keeping one of them in leadership, considering the results. Yes, Kevin McCarthy, whether you think he's a legit conservative or not, and honestly, this is where we get into circular firing squads, which I'll be talking about. Yes, they won the House by that much. It should have been a bigger win. When I went over the numbers the last time, all those close races, easily one or two, a couple of percentage point swing the other way, which would have been more in line with the historical results as far as the spread, whatnot. I mean, they averaged 2% on the average, but some of those were bigger on the wins. But that's a swing, 2% swing. In some of the cases, a 4% spread gives you a different one. So a couple percentage points, and now you're a couple hundred votes out from winning. It doesn't take much, and we would have had easily another 11 representatives. A lot more chance to have control, real control over committees instead of relying on rhinos. I know some people really hate that term. And when I use that term, I don't use it over one issue. And that's something we got to get over. Just because a politician disagrees with us as conservatives on one issue, and yes, we have our one issue voters out there, does not make them a rhino by itself. It's when they seem to do a John McCain, and every time it's convenient, they support the Democrats on some of the high-profile stuff, then we have a problem. And I've long thought that the late John McCain, he just wanted whatever was going to make him seem loved in the media, that's what he was going to support. So the Republicans, it was their second low, as an out-of-party power party, it was the second lowest result of the century. The only one lower was when the out-of-power party, the Democrats, got, under a special circumstance, got 45.2% in 2002. So this is like a historically bad for the out-of-power party for this, in terms of this century so far. With the high being in 2018, where the Democrats got 53%. So, I mean, just a couple percentage points swing across the board, you pick up a lot of seats. So that's something to think about. So you go back to that, you say, so it's hard to justify McCarthy. Now, there's also to say that when you're the majority leader, the Speaker of the House, and you are in divided government, there's good reason to say you're going to have to compromise. Problem is when your compromise is to be Mitch McConnell and say slow down there, Democrats, or You oppose your own party's president on trying to have a controlled budget when you have a trifecta. You're a part of the problem. And Mitch McConnell did that when his first budget was almost no growth as he proposed it. It eventually was passed with a whole bunch of stuff. Mitch McConnell called it barbaric to cut foreign aid. So with Rick Scott, he tried. I'm sorry, he doesn't have it for me. But what did we stand for? Mitch McConnell was mad at Rick Scott for putting something out because he said now they can use it against us. Leadership is saying, this is what we are for. Follow me, and here's why. Mitch McConnell also blew $9 million on Alaska. You had Lisa Murkowski, who I am not a fan of. A lot of Republicans are not a fan of. And another Republican, the top two in their ranked choice voting situation, he had all of his, they had 80% between the two of them for the Senate. That was going to be a Republican that would have caucused with Republicans. He should not have spent a dime on Alaska. And neither should any other outside group, unless it was an issue group, in a difference between Murkowski and the other guy, whose name I cannot remember. I didn't call it up. That is terrible, terrible strategy. So, I mean, that $9 million might have made the difference in Arizona for the governor's race. That $9 million might have made the difference in Nevada for the Senate. But instead he blew it on Alaska to keep it one of his friends in power. Think about in those terms. Now for some, my late instructor used to say, if you point a finger, you got three more pointing back at you. Let's talk about some other things. Third-party conservatives. Some people get really angry over, and this is the circular firing squads in general. Third-party conservatives, too many people running in a top two primary, in this ranked choice voting. Obviously, we can win in a ranked choice voting because two Republicans were the top in Alaska. Alaska is generally considered a red state. So we have to learn how to win in that situation. It should not be put out there general, but we should not sit there and just say, we're not going to do that. As conservatives, we always have to ask, is this about me or is this about our cause? Being willing to make it about your cause is exactly why liberals get away with the crap they do. So we need to look hard. If you're thinking about running, you need to run it well in advance. Here in our own state, we could have captured the Secretary of State position, but they ended up with a whole bunch of people running as Republicans and splitting up the vote. And there was a Republican who had a good chance, Keith Wagner, but people threw in their hat at the last minute. You don't decide the day of filing week to run for a statewide office. Quit that crap. And that goes right into Kansas. What benefit was it to put a real conservative on in the Kansas governor's race? Trump won that state 56%. It was a below average turnout for everybody. But you had a third party. The Democrat won with 49.6% of the vote. Abortion was, of course, on the ballot. And then you had this Senate candidate. The Senate candidate won 60% of the vote against a Democrat. We had a third party running who got more than a couple percent, or got a couple percent. That could have easily been enough. Because I want to make a real choice for conservatives. Thank you very much. You just left a Democrat, not even a rhino, a Democrat in office for your ego. So let's be honest about something. Everyone talks about wanting a third party or how they want real conservatives. Real conservatives need to be active in the party. Real conservatives need to put themselves out. Real conservatives need to start saying, holding their people's feet to the fire in the primaries. But they also need to be willing to coalesce behind a candidate. Better the guy that you agree with 70% of the time than the person you agree with 30% of the time. Even if it means that you don't get the guy that agrees with you 90%, okay? And no one's going to agree 100%. So that right there, that's one of those critical one of those big high-profile losses. Not as high-profile as some, but it was a Trump endorsement, and of course, that's when people look at. So look at that real seriously. And we all need to shut the hell up about the "they cheated" narrative. Fortunately, Kari Lake made a lawsuit based on matters of fact, not matters of law. She got to have her day in court that way. It sounds to me like something very questionable happened. I think that might be the case, but the court disagreed. So, but it could be something intentional, it could be something not. And the court basically said, you haven't proved intent, so we're not going to let it go. And one of these supposed experts that testified said you could only do it intentionally. Kind of looks pretty hard to me. Now, whether it was enough to make the difference on the ballot, I don't know. But there certainly looked like something improper. So, but that is not going to get people to, if all you're going to do is say, it was unfair last time, it was unfair last time, it was unfair last time, people are not going to vote for you. Whining doesn't get it. Grow up. Sometimes you're going to lose. There's one time where an election applied to, it was on my ballot where I thought I lost because of something untoward. One time. And that was 2004, because look at this bin of ballots we just happened to find after the recount. It was just enough coming from a Democratic stronghold that the Democrat wins the Washington governor's race, and that was 2004. That kind of looked kind of suspicious to me, but I didn't campaign going, Christine Gregoire cheated. No, we campaigned on what Rossi could do in 2010, or 2008. We didn't campaign on, we think they cheated. Okay. On the ground. So it's ranked choice voting. Again, you just got to figure out how to do this. If this means one Republican on the ballot and stop having 15, stop with the ranked choice voting. Stop with you're creating a circular firing squad. Okay. As the case was, there was 2 Republicans for the Senate, but one of them was an incumbent. One of them was a challenger. I don't know if that will work in the future. Other things related to on the ground. Mail-in voting. If that means you got to start calling people and saying, get your vote in, that's what you got to do. In most states, ballot harvesting is legal. It is not a cheat if it's within the rules. You want to see Democrats ban ballot harvesting? Republicans need to take it up. We need to do it better. And you'll see Democrats real quick want to get rid of ballot harvesting if it's a way that they think that they can win. So, and it worked. There were states, some just races in California, a couple of congressional races where red states, or normally red districts, had gone blue in 2020. They went back to red in 2022. Why? Because the Republicans went out and did exactly what the Democrats do. So we don't like it. We may not want it, but if it is the rules, we got to live with it. So ballot harvesting has to be a part of it. We have to adopt those things. We need to adapt to it. Just like social media, Barack Obama, that was what put him in. I had helped drag the local party into social media. We got to get into that stuff. And then going right off of that, of course, is the abortion issue. So let's just say Dodd was a huge win. And way back then, when I only had 15 and not 19 subscribers or something to that effect, I lost a subscriber. I said, take the win, don't push it. You should have been pushing, protection for pro-life pregnancy centers, or making sure the support was in place for, young women who have an unwanted pregnancy so they can have their baby. Making adoption easier, not a pain in the rear. You should have been doing those things, not trying to further extend the laws that you could now potentially make. Because the abortion issue is a spectrum of what people think. It's either it's not a one or the other. There are people that are abortion up to the moment of birth. The former governor of Virginia saying, well, when he was asked if a baby was born alive during an abortion procedure, said, well, they would make the baby comfortable and then the mother and the doctor would decide what to do. And it's like, this is creepy and weird and disgusting. But on the flip side, there's very, very few people who are going to say, absolutely never in any circumstances. Okay? You may get a larger percentage than this without restriction, but across the board, you ask people, well, what about third trimester abortions? You will get 60-70% of people saying, no, that should not be allowed outside the mother's life, which is a very tiny percentage, even according to the Guttmacher Institute. The hard cases are a tiny percentage of abortions, the true hard cases. Most of them are not hard cases. You say, what about second trimester? And you get closer to a 50-50. You say before the end of the first trimester, you actually get 60% opposition to bans. But you can whittle away at this thing. Because a lot of people don't realize a 15-week abortion ban is longer than the first trimester. Okay? So understand that. So when you get this big win, as a part, this applies to strategy, then you get some idiot like Lindsey Graham, who I am convinced was trying to shoot the conservative movement in the foot. That includes the pro-life movement. This man is not your friend, or he's too stupid to be in office. He goes to try to do a nationwide 15-week abortion ban, which draws all the attention right back to that issue instead of people thinking about inflation and gas prices and a war going on that we shouldn't want to get involved in and all these other issues, and then it brings up the abortion issue again. Thank you, Lindsey Graham, for making life harder. And see, this isn't one issue that caused the loss. Lack of leadership and strategy, yes, that could have been a percentage point or two. Trump could have just been a percentage point or two of maybe Trump drove a higher turnout for the Democrats. But you add these things up. You got Trump driving Democratic hatred. You got abortion bringing out the pro-abortion left. You got a lack of strategy and leadership where Republicans are going, what are we for? Well, we're just not Biden. So, and then you get things like putting abortion on the ballot and who our leadership is in an issue like this. Who represents the abortion movement? Is it a person who says, I run a pro-life pregnancy center, we can do this without having to kill children? Or is it somebody that's saying, we should ban abortion in cases even including the mother's life? The leader of the ballot measure in Kansas to make sure there was no constitutional protections, literally said that she supported it in all cases, not even an exception for the mother's life. Think about who you're making your speaker, who's going to be the speaker. Father Pavone, which I'm going to do a separate video on that guy because that's a religion meets politics issue. A couple years ago, he did the portrayal of an aborted fetus on an altar. Turned out it was not a consecrated altar. Turns out it was an actual aborted baby, which that by itself that baby's body should not have been abused like that. When you do an image like that, if that's the kind of image, you're convincing the people in the middle that you are crazy. So think about who your leaders are if you're about a particular issue. So abortion was on the ballot in 6 states. Why was it on the ballot in 6 states? Well, 3 ballots, and I will include a link to Ballotpedia detailing them. You had Kansas to amend the state constitution to state that nothing in the state constitution creates a right to abortion or requires government funding of abortions, and saying it has granting their legislature the power to restrict it. Could have just taken the Dodd win and saved that for a couple years from now. You could have possibly won it. California, Democrats put it in there to provide that the state cannot deny or interfere with reproductive freedom of their most intimate decisions, and that's in quotes, including decisions to have an abortion or to choose or refuse contraceptives. So Democrats put a protection on. In Kentucky, they were going to do something similar to Kansas. Again, failed. The pro-abortion side won all the way down because you had to keep pushing it. You couldn't, if you think of this, if people talk about the culture war, sometimes I was watching a World War II documentary before I started doing this video while I was doing my research. If you think of it as a culture war, sometimes you advance, you capture ground, you have to dig in, you have to entrench yourself, you have to let your supplies come up, you need to attend to your flanks. Otherwise, you get encircled and knocked and captured, or your force gets destroyed, or you get pushed back. Okay? It was actually about the Battle of the Bulge, and history knows, the Nazis came forward, they couldn't get to the critical points, and they ended up in a worse situation than they were before. So, in the Eastern Front's even worse for that, on both sides. So, then in Michigan, they pushed through a right to an abortion on the state level. In Montana, Vermont, it was a right to personal right to, it was, as it puts, to provide a state constitutional right to personal reproductive autonomy, which honestly we already had, because you can always refuse to have sex to begin with. In Montana, it was basically a state version of a Born Alive Act. Probably the biggest ballot defeat there. Most people, if you ask them, they probably didn't know what it was about. One of the Republican representatives had a very low, if I recall, do a check here, I don't see it on my list, but they had a low turnout, or a very narrow victory. I think they did have one that was won by less than 50%, but I'm not going to go looking for it now. But in a state like Montana, red state, that lost. If you ask most people, should they be required to provide medical assistance to a baby born because of an abortion, they probably would say yes. And it was shot down. A very moderate proposal, shot down because people's lack of strategy. A friend of mine commented that I seem to view politics more as strategy than just about the principle of the thing. It is both. But if you don't think strategically, your principles mean nothing. So think about, you got to think about that. And the last item, candidate quality. Now, this gets very specific, and this can make or break. With all of these other things being the case, how did Mehmet Oz lose? He was up against a man who has had a stroke, who can barely communicate. Mehmet Oz is not likable. He wasn't showing as you didn't connect with people. He didn't live in Pennsylvania, except that he wanted to run for Senate in Pennsylvania, which that's a whole other issue that probably should not be allowed for anyone. That would have killed Hillary. If I had my way, that would have killed Hillary Clinton's candidacy and the candidacy of others. You should have to have a residency requirement. If they ever pass term limits, they need to include that so that You actually have to live in your House district. You actually have to have lived in your state a while to represent it. Carrie Lake was arguably a very good candidate. Knew the issues, was likable, but she was tied to all this other stuff that maybe she couldn't overcome. This is why I say this is all of these issues. And no, Herschel Walker was not a good candidate. I went to a campaign school in 2010 as part of going to the Republican State Convention. They give you a chance to take classes and training, and one was called campaign school. And they said, do an honest assessment of yourself if you're thinking of running, and look at yourself as the opposition would. Do research on yourself as the opposition would. Be honest with yourself. Is there things in your background that could be a problem? Herschel Walker was not a good candidate. Just being loyal to Trump cannot be, or to any other future presidential candidate or president, cannot be a qualification. It needs to be, what are your positions on issues? What is your experience? What is your knowledge? In addition to, of course we want somebody ideologically conservative. Herschel Walker was not a good candidate. A better quality candidate who is just as conservative could have beaten him, because Republican Brian Kemp won in Georgia. Adam Laxalt in Nevada, he was a previously failed candidate, yet we won the governorship. I mean, there were bright spots in this. But when you take all of these issues, it's time for some self-examination on these. And to sit there and say, it wasn't this because it might point at you, doesn't cut it. If you want to change things for the better in this country, you got to look at yourself. That includes me. I was busy rebuilding working on remodeling my laundry room and getting ready for knee surgery when I could have been outdoor belling. The smallest little things can add up in a tight race. Lauren Boebert only won by less than 600 votes. A few hundred votes made the difference in a congressional race where you had about 200,000 or 300,000. And this gets into that get out the vote issue with strategy. A lot of these, there was races in California where they only had 150,000 votes, less than 200,000. Every congressional district has about 750,000 people. A lot of the districts had 300,000 votes, 350,000 votes cast. Why are we not seeing more? In those districts, especially the ones where we lost, there's a problem. We need to get in, register voters, and then get that vote out, because that could have easily made a difference. So, there's the post, but that's the post-mortem. That's the self-examination we need to take. Went a little long, but take it to heart about that whole thing. From whether it's Trump or whoever else is at the top of the ticket in the future, our strategy, our leadership, candidate quality, an issue that is really big. If you get a big win, take it and concentrate on other things. Don't keep pushing it. Until then, you all take care. Yeah.